Good afternoon, colleagues. This is meeting number 103 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Thursday, June 7th, 2018. And we are here today in consideration of Report 4, Replacing Montreal Champlain Bridge, Infrastructure Canada, of the 2018 spring reports of the Auditor General of Canada. And I would remind our committee and our audience here today that we are televised, and so if you wouldn't mind please silencing your cell phones. It's much less disruptive than if they are silenced right away. Even I'll put it on vibrate. We have with us this afternoon from the Office of the Auditor General, we have Mr. Michael Ferguson, the Auditor General of Canada, and Philippe Legoff, Principal. Welcome. Also from Infrastructure Canada, we have Ms. Kelly Gillis, Deputy Minister, Infrastructure and Communities, Marc Fortin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Program Operations, and Nathalie Bossé, Director General, Major Bridges. And so we welcome all our guests. We will have an opening statement or testimony from our Auditor General, and then we'll move to Ms. Gillis. Welcome, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous donner.
Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our 2018 spring report on replacing Montreal Champlain Bridge. The audit focused on whether Infrastructure Canada managed selected aspects of the new Champlain Bridge project to deliver a durable bridge on time and in a cost-effective manner. In past audits, we stressed the importance of life cycle management of government assets. This audit showed that when signs of asset deterioration were not identified, not understood, not communicated, or not acted upon at the right time, the result is significant additional costs to taxpayers.
1962. But 25 years later, the Jacques Cartier Champlain Bridge Incorporated, or JCCBI, had to start major repairs because of serious structural problems that were abnormal for a bridge of that age. In 1999, engineers reported the possibility of failure of an exterior girder. However, JCCBI didn't have a financial indicator that would compare the cost to maintain the bridge with the cost to build a new one. Furthermore, it didn't identify that the bridge would have a shorter useful life than expected. It was only in 2007 that JCCBI realized that the bridge was in urgent need of repairs, and it communicated that to the minister, but it didn't clearly explain the rapid deterioration of the bridge. At that time, JCCBI stated that the planning for the construction of a new bridge should be put in place to have an operational crossing by 2021. In 2011, the government approved the construction of a new bridge to be opened in 2021. That time frame was consistent with the fact that the planning, procurement, and construction of a bridge of that size generally takes 7 years. However, because of increased concern about the possible failure of some structural components, the government announced in 2013 that the project would be conducted according to an accelerated construction schedule to deliver a new bridge in 2018. Had JCCBI identified and communicated the seriousness of the Champlain Bridge degradation in 2007, a new bridge could have been delivered by 2015. Because the decision to replace the Champlain Bridge wasn't made at the optimal time, the government will incur expenditures of more than $500 million that could have been avoided. This includes more than $300 million for major repairs to the existing bridge and more than $200 million that will have to be paid to the private partner for additional costs related to the construction of the new bridge.
Another issue we identified in our audit was that Infrastructure Canada analyzed procurement models 2 years after the government had decided to use a public-private partnership, or P3 model. the department's analysis was not based on reliable data and assumptions and did not consider all key risks. A more thorough analysis would have indicated that a P3 model could be more expensive than a traditional procurement model. We found that Infrastructure Canada evaluated the technical proposals for the construction of the new bridge consistently and fairly. The department chose an approach that compressed the procurement process so that the selected bidder would be able to proceed quickly with construction. However, this evaluation approach contained flaws that introduced major risks and uncertainties about the bidder's proposals on durability, design, operation, maintenance, and rehabilitation. For example, we found that all 7 of the rated criteria were assigned the same weight, even though some were more important than others. In our view, the criteria on design and on operation, maintenance, and rehabilitation should have been given more weight than other criteria, such as the approach to manage the project.
Concluded that Infrastructure Canada didn't plan the replacement of the existing Champlain Bridge in a cost-effective manner. In our view, the new Champlain Bridge won't be delivered within budget, and delivering it on time will be very challenging. We made 5 recommendations, and Infrastructure Canada agreed with them. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now turn to Ms. Gillis, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today to speak to you about the Auditor General's report on replacing Montreal's Champlain Bridge. I am joined by Marc Fortin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Program Operations, and Nathalie Bossé, Director General, Major Bridges Project. I'd like to thank the Auditor General and his staff for the work in examining this important project. We recognize the opportunity the audit provides and how we can learn and improve our practices so we can continue to deliver high-quality infrastructure that provides value for Canadians. Le ministère accepte les recommandations du
The Department accepts the Auditor General's recommendations, and I'm pleased to confirm that steps have been already taken to address the findings. Further actions will also be incorporated in future projects and asset management strategies.
Project is one of the largest infrastructure projects currently underway in North America. The history and the events of the current Champlain Bridge are well known and have been articulated in the Auditor General's report. After several studies to understand the state of the bridge and the options of rehabilitation or replacement were undertaken, a decision was made in 2011 to replace the Champlain Bridge while ensuring work would be undertaken so it could remain safely open until the new bridge was operational. Given the complexity of this project, in 2012, private sector experts were engaged to support a multi-departmental team of professionals who developed a business case to determine the best delivery method for the replacement of the bridge. Based on their analysis, the government announced the decision to move with a P3 procurement model in December 2013, after which a competitive process using the latest methodology for P3s was undertaken in March 2014, concluding with the selection of a preferred proponent in April 2015 with signature on the St. Lawrence. Critical to the procurement and management of this project was the comprehensive governance and oversight structure put in place, ranging from top-level senior ministerial and DM committees to technical working groups supported by private sector expert advisors with global experience in P3 infrastructure models.
Transparency and proactive communications, as well as working in partnership with the Ville de Montréal, Brossard, and the Government of Quebec, were also critical elements to the management of this project. as key milestones or issues were encountered, media and technical briefings were held to ensure all stakeholders had an opportunity to raise questions and to be informed.
In April, we provided details on the only cost increase to date on the project, the negotiated settlement of $235 million. The settlement agreement allowed for the recovery of construction delays to various strikes outside SSL's control, settled all existing claims related to transportation permit issues that our independent arbitrator committee opined on. The agreement also paid for additional measures by SSL to meet delivery date of the new Champlain Bridge as of December 21, 2018. And lastly, it ended the lawsuit filed by SSL in Superior Court. We are now in the late stages of the construction. As you see from the picture that was distributed to the committee, we are almost 80% complete. Infrastructure Canada will continue to work closely with our private sector partner, SSL, who have committed to delivering the bridge in December 2018 as planned. Throughout construction of the new bridge, and until it is operational, JCCBI has and will continue to maintain the existing bridge safely open. They have demonstrated due diligence in ensuring its structural integrity, as well as the safety and efficiency of the corridor while this project has been underway. In
conclusion, every effort has been made to ensure that the project has been rigorously and transparently managed. I would like to thank, once again, the Auditor General for his report, providing us with opportunities to learn from this project and improve on what we do.
To have the opportunity to participate in such an important project that will contribute to the Montreal area for the next 125 years. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gillis. We'll now move to the first round of questioning. And Madame Mendez, vous avez 7 minutes.
I have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for being with us here today. It's obviously for me, as a member for Quebec, this project is very dear to my heart and has been for some time. During my last term from in 2008, when I spoke many times at the House to ask when the bridge would be replaced. For the users of the bridge, they didn't want to repair it, they wanted to replace it. It was visible when we went underneath it that it was falling to bits. There were many reports every 6 months. There was all sorts of independent firms that denounced the obvious degradation of the bridge. It is clear for someone who lives in Brossard and who uses this Champlain Bridge, such as myself, quite regularly. I can't say every day because I hear during the week, but almost every day, that this bridge, for many years, really needed some attention. For many years, it could have been repairs, but since 2008, we've been talking about replacing it. When you did your audit, Mr. Ferguson, were you able to identify why between 2008 and 2011 there was some reticence to accept that we had to replace the bridge? It's a bit difficult to say, but we indicated that the Crown Corp, JCCBI, stated that it was necessary perhaps to start the planning of the new bridge and to have a new bridge in place by 2021. So it appears that it was difficult to have this information. In some cases, the Crown Corp said that it was necessary to replace the bridge. But I think it was important at that time to spend more time at the deterioration of the bridge, looking at it. it was difficult to find the information that indicated this. They explained the situation and the deterioration of the bridge. I'll be the first person to recognize this in terms of engineering and the ability to find solutions that are somewhat innovative to try and keep the current bridge until the end of the new construction of the new bridge. They were really brilliant to find wonderful girders and everything to hold up the bridge. But I'm surprised, as simple citizens who used the bridge, it seemed so obvious that the bridge was falling apart. How come people whose prime responsibility was to ensure the safety of the structure of the bridge spent so many years neglecting it? I know you can't answer me. You just said that you don't have an answer, but I'm wondering how we arrived at a conclusion. I'm not talking about the public servants here at Infrastructure Canada. I'm talking more about the managers of the Jacques Cartier Bridge on the ground, who should have clearly stated the state of the bridge. Ms. Gillis, would you have anything to add to that? In terms of the reports and documentation we saw, since 2007, GCCBI did studies to look at the state of the bridge and looked into replacing the bridge. That happened later. Answer: they thought they would have more time to do a replacement bridge. They thought it would be in place for 2021. But it's somewhat frustrating, and I know we shouldn't base our decisions on these things, but people who were using the bridge had talked about this for many years. They said that the bridge wasn't reliable, that it was falling apart. Visibly, you could see it. There were chunks of cement that were falling onto cars. So something wasn't right. It's as though we did these studies, but at the end, were they really credible? 3 years later, we realize that wasn't the case. How can we rely on these studies? And what should we do to correct how these studies were conducted? Perhaps I would ask you that, Mr. Ferguson, or Mr. Le Goff, who worked on this. Chair, one of the aspects that was really important in this project was the fact that the steel armature was set in concrete. And for engineers, it's really hard to see what the state of the deterioration was. Even if a simple citizen can see a superficial deterioration of the bridge, and there's parts that could come off the structure, but it's partly because they delayed or did not evaluate the level of gravity of the deterioration, and they said they would build a new bridge for 2021 originally.
What could we take out from this process and how we got there?
So thank you for the question. I think where we're at now, and it's something that the Auditor General recommended in his report, is the importance of life cycle asset management. And JCCBI over the last number of years has certainly improved and is working diligently on life cycle management. And something that's also important, and it's an opportunity now, is technology. So if we look at the Champlain Bridge now, it's got many sensors, and there's real-time understanding of the behavior of the bridge and the state of the bridge. And as we look at Pont Jacques Cartier and Mercier, those same types of technology are going to be applied to that. So I think we have a real opportunity to understand the state of our assets now that we didn't have previously.
That's reassuring, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mendez. We'll now move to Mr. Chong, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good
Thank
to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. When I read the report 4 of the Auditor General's report on the Champlain Bridge, but also the report from your office from last fall regarding the government's climate change plans, I can only come to the conclusion that this bridge, which is one of the largest infrastructure initiatives undertaken by the Government of Canada, is not living up to the government's professed claim that it believes in sustainable development, that it believes in economic, environmental, and socially sustainable development. When I read the report from your office, Mr. Ferguson, from last fall, the Office of the Auditor General, it's clear. It says, Environment and Climate Change Canada was not on track to meet the 2020 emission target and had shifted its focus to the 2030 emission target. In Exhibit 1.5 of that same report, it's clear that the government's much vaunted pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change is not going to get us to Paris. It's not going to get us to 2030.
Just as a point of clarification, we're using this committee to study the report that is being provided by professionals of the Bureau du Vérificateur Général, et j'essaie de comprendre l'objectif de mon collègue.
Trying to understand the objective of my colleague's question. We're really trying to understand the findings and recommendations in this report on the work that was conducted and the decisions that the former government took. So if we want to play it political, we can do that too. But I think we should focus on the report.
He referenced a report from last fall, but we are more specific on the Champlain Bridge. So, Mr. Chong, I know you're segueing into that, and we look forward to the transition into the Champlain Bridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Take it that won't be taken away from my time.
No, we've stopped your time, and we've taken away from Mr. Met. No, we haven't.
I'm referencing the report because it's directly tied to the current report being studied by the committee, report number 4. So last fall's report makes it clear that the government's much vaunted plan on climate change is not going to get us to Paris. It's clear in Exhibit 1.5 that the government is 45 megatons short of meeting the Paris target of 523 megatons. And then I read your current report, report number 4, and in that report, you indicate that the government's decision to remove tolls on the bridge has had a huge impact. In fact, you estimate that it's going to increase vehicular traffic over the bridge by some 20%, from 50 to 60 million vehicles a year. This, to me, is not only not abiding by the government's professed principle of internalization of our economic system, it also is doing quite the opposite. It's taking what was an internality for the new bridge, the pricing of traffic over that bridge, and making it an externality. And so I don't see how this upholds the government's professed belief in being environmentally sustainable. I just did a rough back-of-the-napkin calculation on your estimate of 10 million new vehicles a year going over that bridge. And if you look at the average car using about 2,000 liters of fuel a year, average carbon emissions of about 2.3 kilograms per liter of gasoline burned, multiply that by 10 million vehicles, you end up with 46 megatons of additional emissions that are going to be produced by those 10 million new vehicles. Now, I know, ceteris paribus, that's not exactly a detailed analysis, because there'll be some substitution to other forms of transit, and people may be taking other paths to work. But the point is, if we're 45 megatons short of our Paris Accord, the government is, every little decision has an impact, and 10 million new vehicles traveling over this bridge is not getting us to Paris, is not environmentally sustainable. And then the second point I wanted to make, Mr. Chair, is that it's not economically sustainable. You say in your report number 4 that this has blown at least a $3 billion hole in the fiscal framework, that we are going to be collecting $3 billion less in revenues over the first 30 years because of the government's political decision to remove tolls on this. So it's not economically sustainable. The additional traffic actually means more wear and tear on the bridge as well, which is going to at least lead to increased costs. And it's not socially sustainable. It's led to inequity in this country. We have a federal bridge that crosses from the mainland to Prince Edward Island where people pay $47, $46 to cross. We have a new proposed federal bridge across Windsor-Detroit, which millions of Canadians use each and every year. That's going to be tolled, but yet we have a federal bridge across the St. Lawrence where Canadians do not have to pay. So it's not socially sustainable. It's not socially equitable. So I just put those points there, Mr. Ferguson, and I'd, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd ask if there's any comment on that lack of sustainability in this government's management of this federal bridge in Montreal.
Ferguson.
Well, the only thing really that I can say is, again, what our audits deal with are the implementation of government policy rather than the setting or the establishment of government policy. So something like the removal of the tolls, we have indicated in the report, it's something that the department has to deal with the private sector contractor in terms of making adjustments to the contract. I believe that process is still underway, but obviously it's a significant change to the original contract. And when you're dealing with a public-private partnership, part of the value of a public-private partnership is to establish the contractual obligations up front and then not make many changes to them, and this is obviously a significant change to that. Again, in terms of this audit, that's we were just looking at this project. That was a government decision that came along after the original contract was put in place. With regard to the report that we issued that you referenced in the fall, I think I should just point out that what we said, I believe, was with the measures that have been announced so far, those measures themselves would not be sufficient to meet the 2030 target, but that's not to say that there couldn't be other measures put in place.
Did you take a look at, when you reviewed the Champlain Bridge in Report 4, whether or not the government took into account the increased greenhouse gas emissions that would result as a result of their decision to remove tolls from this bridge?
That was not something that we looked at, no.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chong. We'll now move to Ms. Sanssouci. Is that correct?
Oui, sans souci.
Sans souci, oui.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I have 7 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their presentations and for being here today to answer our questions. My first question is for Mr. Ferguson, and it's the first time that I get to ask you a question, but I'd like to congratulate you, and I have tremendous respect for your roles and responsibilities and for those of all of your office. I have been an MP since 2015, and every time that I see a report from your office, it always sheds so much light on the work we have to do in representing our citizens. So thank you very much. I looked at your report very closely because as the new critic for infrastructure, it interests me. And what I found particularly interesting was to see that how much it looked at the future, how we can learn lessons from this immense project and about what led up to the construction of the Champlain Bridge. And this can shed light on future decisions on other projects. And this won't be the last project of this type. So what I found particularly interesting was that in your report, you said that costs will be higher and even worse since the government cannot justify how it concluded that a PPP partnership would allow them to do the $1.75 million that was announced, and it could have cost less. I'd like to hear what you have to say, because in the future we'll have this type of decision to make again. And how much could we have saved with the traditional model? And what were the extra costs involved with this type of model, PPP model? I'll start, and then I'll ask my colleague to give more details. Yes, we did indicate that there were some weaknesses in the assumptions used in the analyses for this project. We examined some aspect of the analyses, and with the assumptions, if they had been more realistic, they might have arrived at a different conclusion, another way of dealing with this project. And now I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Le Goff, to give you more details. Chair, Ms. Sans Souci, we looked at several assumptions and several aspects of the project, including the choice of the procurement model versus another. A lot of the data was fragmented, particularly in terms of the design of the bridge. They used an assumption of 5%, and the standard is usually 10%. So the department used data that obviously led to a considerable variation in cost. And our findings do not necessarily state that a PPP partnership cost more, but the studies should have been done before they made the decision. Okay, I understand. Another aspect of your report says that it's highly unlikely for the Champlain Bridge to be inaugurated by December of this year, given some 20 changes that were decided throughout the project, and they're still being negotiated with the municipalities and provincial governments. My colleague, Ms. Mandes, said it quite correctly, that there were delays in when the decision was made to begin with the work. We had heard talk about it in Quebec for quite some time. So if we, well, I know we're talking theoretically here, but if we had, right in 2006, gone with the traditional model instead, would be facing such delays right now and increases in this process? If, well, we chose a PPP without analyzing the situation and having all the data in place. I said it publicly, but infrastructure should be public. I like the fact that your report focused on the future. What can we learn from this experience for upcoming decisions that we'll have to take? We have to act upstream. As soon as we hear an alarm bell, we have to start studies right away. So if we had in this project right from the onset opted for a traditional model, would we be facing such delays and cost increases? Mr. Ferguson. Once again, I'll start and then I'll ask my colleague to provide more details for you. In terms of the PPP, there is something we can learn from this situation, namely the importance of doing an analysis with reliable assumptions with the right information. We have to do a complete analysis with all the information available. That way we can determine if a PPP is the best way to move forward. So I have no opinion on whether it's better to use a PPP model or another model for such an asset, but it's very important to conduct an adequate analysis. And now I'll ask Mr. Le Goff to provide more details. I know you did not take a position on this, but I understand how you arrived at your decision. Chair, of course, there are some components, such as the loan costs, that are lower for a private partner, so there's savings that were made there. Also, they have an expertise. Sometimes private companies have more than a government company. So once again, I'll reiterate the opinion of the OAG. It's important to consider all these aspects before a decision is made, because quite often the decision only relies on very few aspects, and the assumptions we use are very important in arriving at a conclusion.
Than a minute and a half over already, so we will now move to Monsieur Massé. We can come back to you because I know you got a good line of questioning here. Monsieur Massé, vous avez 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe we could have invited my friend across the way who was in the cabinet at the time that these decisions were taken, why it took so much time to arrive at these decisions. The environmental consequences we know very well. So the delay in establishing the project for the bridge, there's still major congestion in Montreal, there's still greenhouse gas effects, and this bill will allow it to lighten up the congestion and get better flow of traffic. But had it started off earlier, it would have been cost less and we wouldn't be where we are today. However, so much for my preamble. This question might be for Ms. Gillis. The Auditor General mentioned that he had certain concerns as to the respect of the delays, even last December, and the costs that were estimated would possibly be overrun. So I have some questions as how you developed those. Do you think we'll be able to meet the deadlines and within budget? Thank you for the question. With the negotiations, SSL, with the $500 million, this is the only claim that we will be making against the budget currently. There's nothing else on the horizon. We're not aware of any other issues that would bump up the budget for the project. As for the red ribbon cutting and opening the bridge in December the 21st, for $235 million. We are reviewing the risk for delayed opening with SSL. But they have contracted to deliver that bridge ready to use, a turnkey, 21st of December. If they don't deliver the goods at that date, well, there are obligations. And what are those obligations and liabilities? In the auditor's report, we find significant penalties will be imposed. Can you give us the quantum on that if they fail to meet the deadline, 21st of December 2018? Well, for each day of delay during the first week, it's 100 million per day, and after that it's up to 450 million. Thank you. You said that the bridge is 80% complete right now. As of last week, I had the opportunity to fly over the Champlain Bridge, Montjoly to Montreal. I was coming to Ottawa in any case, and I saw the advancement, the project. It's moving ahead. It's very impressive. I'd like to know what kind of follow-up protocols or processes have you put into place so that we are ensured that the work will be completed on time. Thank you for the question. Well, we have a very comprehensive and complete governance structure that we're doing with SSL. We meet with them regularly. They report to us regularly on the progress being made. And we have an independent third-party engineer working on our behalf, ensuring that we have adequate and correct information so that we can ask appropriate and intelligent questions. Now, with this governance structure in place, we can be proactive if we notice any issue that arises. We can deal with it immediately. Well, I'm still not quite clear who would be responsible ultimately for following up on these issues to determine exactly where we stand. You mentioned a few names, but who is ultimately responsible for following up to report back to you and to report to the government? Well, SSL, Signature on the St. Lawrence, is the agent who has to deliver that bridge on time on the 21st of December. That's clear. On our side, we have a team of experts and a consulting engineer who receives these reports and goes over them, and if they spot something that is ambiguous, clear, or seems to need attention, we can rise to the action immediately. Okay, I have 2 minutes left, so if we project into the future to ensure that this infrastructure remains safe and kept in a safe condition in order to not repeat the errors of the past, what mechanisms have you developed to ensure that there's a good monitoring, surveillance, and follow-through? Because, you know, the life of Montrealers depend on this bridge for years to come. Thank you for the question. With a contract at SSL, they will operate and maintain the bridge for 30 years once it's opened. 249 October dates in October. Certain standards, service standards have been established, which have to be respected throughout the operation. And 7 years before the bridge is transferred to government ownership, we will have the services of an independent engineer to thoroughly review the condition of the bridge in order to ensure that it is up to standard and in good condition.
We'll now move back to Monsieur Daltel. Monsieur Daltel, vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, as well, and all the witnesses present. Welcome. Auditor General first. In your report, you state that in 2007, the study was not clearly explained. The impact wasn't clearly explained. I'm trying to look at the exact wording here. In your statement earlier, sorry, you said that earlier, in 2007, JCCBI realized that the bridge was in urgent need of repairs. It communicated that to the minister, but it did not clearly explain the rapid deterioration of the bridge. Can you explain this a bit more? How come it wasn't clearly explained? What wasn't clearly explained? I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Le Goff, to give you more details. Mr. Le Goff? Chair? Mr. Daltel? It's somewhat mysterious, this situation. We weren't able to find evidence that showed the communications between these two agents, between the Department of Transportation at the time and JCCBI. We weren't able to see that the information was transmitted credibly in terms of the gravity of the deterioration of the bridge. This is pretty important in terms of what happens after. Because when I read your report, Auditor General, it's clear the government, based on what you're saying, wasn't clearly informed about the urgent nature of this issue. This led to that. If they didn't state it was urgent, how come? That's why the government didn't act promptly. So I'd like to have more details on that. Everything hinges on that. How come that information was not transmitted clearly in 2007? Once again, it's always difficult to follow all the evidence in this case, but what I can tell you is that at that time, the company indicated that they had to start planning of the new bridge and that they would have a new bridge by 2021. They indicated that they had to start planning of the new bridge, but they did not mention clearly the deterioration of the bridge as such. So it was a bit difficult to understand the urgency, the level of urgency in their communication to the minister. But once again, what I can tell you is that the only thing we noted was that throughout their communications, the Crown Corporation said that they needed a new bridge in 2021, and that was right before they signed a contract with the PPP, and then they said that they needed a new bridge for 2018. But that's the whole question, Auditor General. You're saying in the report that they did not emphasize the deterioration of the bridge. I'm citing what you said earlier. If the company had explained the rapid deterioration of the bridge in 2007, a new bridge should have been put in place earlier. So the gravity of the situation was not communicated. But what was communicated is that there was an issue and that they needed a new bridge open to traffic by 2021. And the decision that was made later meant that the bridge could be built by 2018, as Madame Gillis confirmed in her presentation. There was reservations about 2018, but Ms. Gillis, who is responsible for this file, is saying that yes, it can be built, and it's already 80% built. The deterioration of the bridge and the gravity, how could anyone have made a quick decision if the fundamental information in terms of the deterioration was not provided in the first report in 2007? And that is the reason why we indicated the importance of the life cycle management of this asset. Well, this asset is such an important asset. It's really important to understand the gravity of the situation, the deterioration of such an asset. We stated that the company said they had to start planning a new bridge, but they did not communicate the seriousness of the situation. To the best of your knowledge, Mr. Ferguson, perhaps Ms. Gillis can enlighten us, but at what time was the state of the deterioration of the bridge was formally communicated to authorities in charge? At the end, I believe in 2013, that's when they decided they had to have a new bridge by 2018. So that was the first thing, the first time there was a real indication of this tight timeline, that a new bridge had to be built so quickly. So the chronology is difficult.
We'll come back to you for certain. We'll now move back to Madam Shanahan. Welcome back, and I should have said that about Ms. Sanssouci as well. Welcome to our committee. This is first time to have you here. It's a delight on the committee's behalf to have you. And Ms. Shanahan, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be back. And certainly the issue of the Champlain Bridge is one that's close to the citizens of my riding of Chateauguay-Lacal, which is home to the Mercier Bridge. So we know that there's a direct relationship there that we can get into another time. But regarding this report, and I think the members of this committee and certainly the Auditor General will recall that for me, the most important thing is the lessons learned and how we can improve going forward. So I would like to hear more about the life cycle, what a life cycle costs and review process would look like, and how Infrastructure Canada, so I guess I'm addressing that to maybe to the Auditor General just for an overview, and then to Ms. Gillis to see how that's been implemented at Infrastructure Canada. So Mr. Ferguson.
Well, I think in the course of the report that we produced, you see things like we did a special examination of the Crown Corporation, JCCBI, I believe in 2003, and at that point we indicated that it did not have a financial indicator in place that would have compared the cost of maintaining the bridge to the cost of replacing a bridge. So as early, as I said in my opening statement, as early as 1986, they started to have to do major repairs that were perhaps abnormal for a bridge of that age, but they didn't have a financial indicator in place that would help them understand the long-term cost comparison of maintaining versus replacing. So I think having that is important. Obviously, having the information about the integrity of the bridge, as we've seen, they didn't really understand fully the situation of the bridge as it was deteriorating, and as the Deputy Minister said earlier on, part of that was because they didn't have ways of looking in behind the concrete at some of the structure. So being able to understand that, I think, is important. I think one of the most important lessons perhaps to learn, though, or things to do in terms of the new bridge is, you know, one of the unique characteristics of it is that it is supposed to last 125 years, which is extremely long for a bridge. The government will get ownership of that bridge back after 30 years. This public-private partnership requires the bridge to come back to the government after 30 years. It has to be returned in a certain condition, but after that, the government is going to be responsible for this bridge for another 95 years. So I think making sure that that long-term planning is in place and understanding that the life cycle management of this bridge, because of that 125-year lifespan, is going to be perhaps very different than any other bridge the federal government owns.
And perhaps, Ms. Gillis, then you can tell us how that's going to be executed.
Thank you. And I'll turn to Natalie and Mark to provide some further details on the action plan by JCCBI. But over recent years, JCCBI has put a lot of emphasis on life cycle management. And as I explained before, using technology and sensor technology to understand the behavior and the conditions of certainly the Champlain, and it's moving in understanding what it can do for both the Mercier and the Jacques Cartier, is taking a two-step approach and looking at kind of the actions it can do within a 10-year time horizon, but also having a 50-year horizon on what would be required for proactive maintenance and making sure that the value and the life is extended appropriately within the assets it's responsible for. JCCBI is also doing a lot of research on new building techniques, new types of materials that are appropriate for our climate. And they've actually done a lot of speaking engagements because they're seen as quite the experts in this area right now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for your question. Maybe I can add to the deputy here that indeed JCCBI has implemented a fair amount of technology. Things are evolving in that kind of business. If we're going back in the 50s at Champlain, there were instruments that we didn't have at that time that now they do have and have put system. They call them BMI, Bridge Information System, that are now existing for them to be able to do the monitoring of their asset. They are looking right now at what's going to be the life cycle of Jacques Cartier, and they think there are technology that were not existing not that far ago where they're going to be able to expand the life cycle of that bridge itself.
Chair, how much time do I have?
10 seconds.
Okay, I just wanted to say, les Québécois, on a le taux de
Quebecers use electric cars. They're among the biggest users of electric cars in Canada. So for my colleague, I think electric cars will help us a lot to help us reduce greenhouse gases as well.
Back to Monsieur Deltel.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. This is really at the heart of the issue here. At what time did the government learn that the bridge was deteriorating quite quickly. And according to your report, we noted that the company did not clearly present the rapid deterioration of the bridge. And this is difficult when we don't have the right information to make the right decision at the right time. But that's a fact. I would like to mention another point. When you say that there could be a 20% increase, at the beginning we said there would be a toll bridge, and then we changed our minds, and now there's no longer going to be a toll. There's a 20% increase in traffic on this bridge. What did you base this information on, and what will this increase in traffic have as an impact? First, it wasn't our analyses, it was the department's, and we just indicated that the impact of this change. But I'll ask my colleague once again to give you more details about this. These are the department's documents that showed this information. It wasn't our analyses. Did you analyze the impact of this new situation? Because you talked about a cost overrun. This is something the department has to negotiate with their partnership. They have to determine what the impact of all these changes will be on the contract. We weren't able to say the impact because this aspect has been negotiated with the partner. It wasn't. The negotiations are still underway right now, I believe.
No more pay toll at the entrance of the bridge. What will be the impact of that?
Right now, we are in the process, as the Auditor General has said, of discussions of what would be the impact on it. It would go back to service standards, and I'll ask Natalie and Mark to talk a little bit more. Because we have service standards within the operating and maintenance of the bridge over the duration of the contract with them, that's what would be the varying, depending on what would be happening with the deterioration of the bridge.
Thank you. Ms. Bossé.
Good afternoon. So with regards to those discussions, they pertain... Oh.
Ne soyez pas gênés.
Oh, merci. Donc, oui, en effet, comme le...
Yes, as the Deputy Minister and the AG said, the negotiations and discussions are still underway, and the conversation is focused on the components that will not be done because of the toll, because there won't be a toll. For example, they won't be collecting toll fares, and there are other collection elements that will be removed from the contract, so these discussions are underway. Will there be impacts that just, will there be a small box or not, or a card or not? But what I'm talking about long term, there's $3 billion that won't be there in revenues. So what will the financial impact be? Right now, our discussions are still underway, so these amounts have not yet been determined. Quite respectfully, the government announced this decision 2.5 years ago, and you weren't able to evaluate the financial impact in 2.5 years? These discussions are still underway, and these formulas have to be applied. In terms of the budget for the Champlain Bridge as such, in terms of the toll that you've mentioned, these are two different buckets. In 2.5 years, you're still talking about this. It's just quite surprising. I'd like to go to another point, Ms. Gillis. In your report, you said that you faced strikes, but you were able to make up for lost time. How did this affect your work? In terms of the timetable with the company, in the $235 million we paid, the company added other personnel to work on the bridge. And they also added equipment to make up for lost time due to the strikes. What was the financial impact of the strike on the budget for the bridge? What we negotiated with the company was a price of $235 million. for some elements due to the strike. All of these components together. So this was an overall price. Does that mean that it added to the overall bill of $235 million that wasn't initially expected? The $235 million were not in the original budget. Mr. Ferguson, was it included in the $500 million you mentioned in the report? Yes. So almost half of the overrun was because of the strike? Is that correct? No, it's just not just because of the strike. We also, half of it overrun of the 235 of the 500 million? Once again, in paragraph 4.75, we indicated the 235 million, 63 million to solve the indemnification for transportation costs, and 72 million to accelerate the work. That's one aspect of the second figure here that you've mentioned, but I don't have the specific details in terms of the impact of the strike.
And now we will move to Ms. Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to recollect, and I'm Googling it as I go along, all the reports we've read on the deterioration of Champlain Bridge before the decision was finally made in 2011, and there were a lot. Not just by the Pont-Jacques-Cartier-Champlain Society, but by independent engineers, by all sorts of other stakeholders. And this had been going on for quite a few years. So it's not something that was we just found out about in 2007 or 8. It wasn't. We found out way before that the bridge was having serious problems. That said, we've started the construction of this beautiful new bridge. I can see it coming out of the water literally every week, and it is a beautiful project. It has put a lot of Canadians to work, and I think from people from all over Canada have been joining the construction site throughout. In terms of, okay, we have these costs that have been added because of the transportation limitations of the former bridge, that things couldn't be brought across the bridge, so they had to be brought in by barge or by train or whatever other means. We had the strike, we had all sorts of other impediments that caused some delays and some additional costs. But I would say that generally speaking, the project itself has kept to its initial expectations or design, no?
The project itself has
Yes.
kept to its original design, yes. And the 235 negotiated settlement is the only additional cost that we've had to date on this particular project.
For these very unexpected circumstances. Because the strike, the strike caused some costs, but the engineers, the Quebec engineers strike, I think that's what we were referring to in the report.
Iron workers strike, the engineers, public service engineers strike. Yes.
But definitely the fact that also you had or SSL had to use different means to bring materials to the construction site was definitely another added cost.
There was permits related to heavy load on roads from the Quebec government, as well as permits from JCCBI on heavy loads going over the current Champlain Bridge that also contributed, and were also part of the negotiated settlement, yes.
On the question of tolls, the fact that we are putting a train, an electric train on the bridge, and that this is being done by the Pension Fund of Quebec. This is a big, big project of the Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec. And we're all, I mean, as far as I understand, the financial arrangement is that they will be getting some revenue from obviously exploiting the train over a period of 30, 40, or how many years that they will have for that, which is why they're investing clearly. They're not doing it just simply for investing in the train. How does that, or could this compensate in any way for the taking away of the tolls?
So any of the changes, which were one of them for REM coming on the particular bridge, any cost related to that would be borne by CDPQ in making sure that the design is not, and the bridge is not financially impacted by that change.
I understand that part, but I also I just want to try to see for the private investor now, the SSL, the constructor, the builder, the fact that they don't get the revenue from tolls. Will they get any revenue from the Caisse de dépôt et placement?
No, the toll revenue was never going to go to SSL. It was always separate from that. No, it was always going to go back to the fiscal framework. It was never part of the agreement or the contract with SSL.
Okay, so that was not how they were going to get back their part of the PP3.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was always separate, and it would have gone back to the fiscal framework and taken into consideration for finance for overall general revenues. It was never directly related to this particular contract. So how were
they going to get their profit from the PP3?
They would be reimbursed with service arrangements, payments from the government directly, related to service standards and maintaining the operations of the bridge, meeting those service standards.
Okay, so that would be a different kind of PP3 than the ones we see in Europe, for example, right now, where the ones who build highways and toll highways usually are the ones who get the tolls back for them. So this would be different. This
would be different, and there's a full range of PP3s, some with a revenue, maybe risk component to it. This was never intended to have that, and it was never part of the operations from the beginning. That is not a change.
Does that make any change in your opinion, Mr. Ferguson, in how this fiscal arrangement may or may not impact the viability of the PP3?
Well, again, as the deputy said, it wasn't part of the compensation for the partner. So the impact of the reduced revenue is an impact on the government's fiscal framework. The impact on the contract is the fact that it will cause more volume of traffic on the bridge without the tolls. The private partner is responsible for the maintenance of the bridge through that first 30 years, so that will have an impact on what they have to do. So there will be an impact not on the revenue side. There will be an impact on the cost side for the maintenance, and then the revenue side. The impact is on the government itself because that money is no longer in future budgets.
Thank you very much.
Move to Ms. Sanssouci again.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My next questions are for the representatives of Infrastructure Canada. As you said earlier, this report is an opportunity to learn and to improve practices. And this is why I took a look at the detailed plan that you tabled at various recommendations. And I have a few questions on that. Considering 4.62 recommendation on methodology as to the decision of a PPP or a traditional determination of the various elements and criteria required, that the bidders actually fulfill all the requirements. You indicated that next year there's going to be a cooperative effort with the Procurement Canada, Public Works, to work on that. Are you already working systematically with Procurement Canada and developing the process? And on the basis of your past experience, what changes might you be envisioning right now? Of course, you're going to do a study and you're going to present some kind of conclusions. But do you have a notion now? Could you share some of that with us? What do you propose to do? Yes, well, thanks for the question. There's always a member of their team and our team working together. I spoke about this spirit of openness. We have a team from various departments. It's across departments. We're working collegially with PSPC rather. And when we work on such a complex procurement issue, it's a learning process. We take a look at what has to be taken into consideration when we develop a similar project. We've already taken a look at and shared with our partners, departmental partners, for the Gordie Howe International Bridge, Windsor-Detroit. We're trying to apply some of the lessons learned to other projects as well. So it's underway. The process is underway. The learning process is being used. And once we have a bit of time to take a step back, once the bridge is going, we'll have a further, deeper look at our processes. Would you have any idea of what kind of changes you'll be bringing to bear? Well, one lesson already learned is that the governance structure and the information communications, information management systems and processes need to be re-examined. Whether it's a PPP or a traditional model, we have to make sure that we have a very good communication model. And with the governance structure, we have to make sure that we have internal expertise so that we can take a look and evaluate the various items of information that come forward. We have to know which good questions to ask to get the information that we need. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Peltin? I think your question is very, very significant. We are building infrastructure of various sizes and of various types, major projects and not so major projects. For the Champlain Bridge or for mass transit, sometimes we build infrastructure that we have to have a long-term plan. Some infrastructure will only create problems in the future if we're not careful. Here, the systems that were just referred to have been implemented, and they will stay in place. And this becomes part and parcel of the contract, and it'll become part and parcel of any further contracts. Okay. 4.45, a recommendation on future analyses. You said you will be looking at a reference case in cooperation with PSPC, and that this reference case will be based on a representative sampling of a process on performance criteria. So, my question, didn't this already exist? Well, we have much of this information, but we can always improve with each new project. It's all grist for the mill and the information and the improvement. Okay, thank you. Yes, the information in hand was used in our decision-making process, of course, but there's always occasion to improve. All the data was all in the same place, and that's why perhaps in our recommendation or in our answer to the recommendation that we will be working with PSPC. They're responsible for infrastructure in large measure, or procurement at least, for the federal government, and the information will be made available for further. Well, I'll ask about information management in my next question, but in any case, 4.44, recommendation number, choice of a model, of a procurement model, PPP or conventional, traditional. And before having undertaken and completed an value for money analysis, that you had done a profitability one, which led you to conclude on the choice of a model. Did those analyses occur before or after the decision of choosing a PPP? Because when one looks at the report, I almost had the impression that the sequencing of the decision-making process might have been a little bit non-sequential. Well, can they answer the question?
Know that we're 3 minutes over your time, and I'm trying to be as flexible because you're new here. Ms. Gillis.
Oui, merci pour la question. En 2011,
Yes, thanks for the question. In 2011, a decision was taken to replace the bridge. At that time, they decided to look at the opportunities to have a P3 model, a PPP, for the construction of the bridge. After the decision was taken, a team was put together. And before that, it was Transport Canada that was heavily involved. The earpiece is very close to the microphone. And we hired PricewaterhouseCoopers as our specialists who are experienced in P3 projects to see if a traditional model or the P3 model would be the preferable one, which would be the most appropriate to have the project go forward. And it was based on that information and their analyses that the government had taken the decision in 2013 to go forward with a P3.
General, was there a difference in dates on when the decision on the P3 there was stated? We thought that maybe our Auditor General said that 2011 the decision was made, and if I understood correctly through translation, you said 2013?
based on the chronology and the information that we have, the decision in 2011 was made to replace the bridge and to examine whether a P3 would be the optimal model. And there was a mandatory P3 screen at the time. But the analysis on whether a traditional versus a P3 would be undertaken, that analysis happened between 2012 and 2013. Okay. And then the decision was announced in 2013 to proceed with the P3.
Thank you. Good questioning. Mr. Chong, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to build on the line of questioning that Madame Mendes had started on. So I just want to understand what exactly is the case with the payments and the revenues. Now, originally, as I understand it, the tolls that were to be collected for passenger cars and trucks would go into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. It would be returned to the fiscal framework.
That obviously is not there anymore, and I'm not sure that Madame Mendes had her question answered. I think what she was asking is there will be public transit, rapid transit using this bridge. Is there a source of revenues that will be generated for the Consolidated Revenue Fund as a result of, trains crossing that bridge?
There is none that I am aware of right now, no.
So those trains will be crossing the bridge for free?
I do not believe that there's an agreement on those trains crossing the bridge just yet.
Just yet. But is the idea that they will be charged some sort of fee for crossing the bridge, or will they be able to cross the bridge without charge? What's the thinking on that right now?
That decision has not been made, so I cannot say.
Now, on the other flow of payments, my understanding is that the Government of Canada will have to make payments to the partner for the operations and maintenance of this bridge. What are those payments? What were those payments expected to be prior to the decision to remove the tolling on the bridge?
Those payments are, I believe it's in the Auditor General's report. I don't want to quote the wrong number, 700, and we can get you. It's in the Auditor General's report for operating and maintenance over the 30 years. And that is the amount right now that will be paid. That is the contractual amount.
And obviously, that amount will be increased, and I'm assuming that you're in negotiations to increase those payments to the partner because of the decision to remove the tolls, which will result in higher traffic volumes, which will result in higher wear and tear. Is that correct?
We're in negotiation with the partner to reduce the overall cost because they will no longer have to construct items and do things regarding tolling. and we are looking at what the wear and tear could be and what the implications could be on the maintenance and service cost over a period of time.
Okay, so are you telling this committee that the decision to remove the tolling plazas and the electronic tolling equipment and other infrastructure associated with tolling is going to be far greater a reduction in costs than the increase in maintenance and wear and tear on the bridge over the lifespan of the first 30 years?
I don't know the offhand numbers for the maintenance. I will ask Natalie to, but the amounts are in negotiation right now.
Okay, because that would strike me as, I would be surprised if that were the case. I mean, 30 years is a long time. An additional 20% increase in traffic over that 30 years, I think, would be not insignificant in terms of wear and tear.
It determines, depending on the durability of the bridge, the engineering assessments of what the impact on the bridge might be. Yeah. So is it an incremental impact, and does it have a significant cost factor? And those are all the elements that are being looked at now.
When do you expect to have the figures for how much extra it's going to cost to maintain this bridge as a result of the increased wear and tear, a result of the government's decision to remove tolls on the bridge? When do you expect to have those figures?
Those are being negotiated now. So.
We would expect to have those figures by the fall.
By the fall? Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, are you going to revisit this issue when you have some figures to take a look at? Because I didn't see in your report any specific figures regarding the increased cost of the operations of this bridge due to the increased wear and tear. You made mention that the increased vehicular traffic will no doubt increase the wear and tear on the bridge, but I don't think you actually had any hard figures on what those numbers will be.
Well, we didn't have any numbers because, again, it is all being negotiated, the impact of removing the tolls. As of right now, no, we don't have any plans to come back and revisit this piece of work. That's not to say that we couldn't, but right now we don't have any plans to.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. The other question I had for the department, because I know that the Auditor General didn't specifically look at greenhouse gas emissions as part of the audit. There's a federal Sustainable Development Act. Parliament's there's one in place already. Parliament's looking at passing a bill that would make amendments to that act. Clause 5 of that act says that the government, in all its decisions, must not only accept the principle of ecologically efficient use of natural, social, and economic resources, it needs to integrate environmental factors in the making of all its decisions. So my question for the department is, did the government take into account the increased greenhouse gas emissions that would result from the extra 10 million cars and trucks that would cross this bridge each and every year because of the elimination of tolls?
Thank you for the question. The department is complying with all environmental rules and regulations in the construction of this particular bridge.
But did it take into account the increased greenhouse gas emissions that would result from the extra 10 million cars and trucks that would cross this bridge?
I have not seen an assessment on that as of right now.
Thank you. I think I'll just finish, Mr. Chair, with just a comment. I think it's important that we not lose the forest for the trees here. The increased cost of the bridge, to be sure, is a lot of money. It's some $500 million. But the decision to remove the tolls on this bridge is a far bigger impact, and I know that wasn't the focus of the audit, far bigger impact on the fiscal framework than any other single factor, by a factor of 6. We're losing $3 billion in revenue in the fisc, as they call it, over the next 30 years as a result of non-collection of revenues. We're also are facing much greater increased operational costs of the bridge, a result of 10 million extra cars and trucks crossing it. I assume in the fall we'll get some numbers on that. And we're also facing significantly increased greenhouse gas emissions, particularly relevant because we don't have a comprehensive plan yet to get us to 2030. So I just make that point because I think it's important for those issues to be taken into account when reviewing the government's decision and management of this bridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Don't have any other questioners, but I would like just to just to add another question here, and it's every once in a while our analysts will direct us to a question that they may be interested in. But to Mr. Ferguson, to our Auditor General, on page 9 of your report, chart exhibit 4.6, you kind of go through the timeline of everything. And you know, for example, in 1999 to 2003, independent engineers found bridge degradation and structural problems. There was no information put into the FBCL, which is the Federal Bridge and whatever corporation, corporate plan. So it sounds like it almost wasn't mentioned, and consequently there was not any action taken. Then in 2004, the JCCBI raised concerns that the bridge was reaching the end of its service life more quickly than expected. 04, information on the reduction of the bridge's life expectancy. Information on the reduction of the bridge's life expectancy in the FBCL corporate plan, but really no action taken. Then in 2005, the JCCBI found that more structural concerns regarding girder deterioration. It requested an engineering firm to design an emergency truss for possible support of a failing girder. They did the design. Was there a girder then produced, made, in case there was this emergency? I'm not sure how this works. That never happened, right? Not in 2005, but were pieces being fabricated and being ready to be put back into the bridge?
I do not know the answer to that question, but I can ask JCCBI and get back to you.
It says no action taken, but it sounds like it requested an engineering plan. Then in 06, the JCCBI conducted an independent life cycle cost analysis for the existing bridge and concluded that maintaining the existing bridge would cost more than building a new bridge by 2021. Financial analysis results in the corporate plan. I guess the reason I'm asking this goes back to an issue that we'll be looking at next Tuesday, and that is your message in your most recent Auditor General report. And that Auditor General report talks about the obedient culture in the public service. Because of this culture, the government's short-term perspective can conflict with the public service's more long-term view. And I guess I would ask you, Mr. Ferguson, did you see that culture here in this audit of Infrastructure Canada?
So again, it's the difficulty, and I think what you are struggling with is the difficulty that we had as well as we were trying to work through all of the time frame on this. You know, again, as far back as 1986, there were indications that the bridge was deteriorating or that needed repairs that were abnormal for a bridge of that age. And then you can go through the fact that 1999 to 2003, they had these, you know, they were starting to find these serious degradation issues. But when you go and look at the corporate plans of FBCL, which is a parent company of the bridge of the JCCBI, you know, the information isn't really forthcoming about the seriousness of the situation. And when they are talking about it, they're talking about needing a new bridge by 2021, and it's not until we actually get into a contract or just before a contract that all of a sudden it's discovered that the new bridge is needed by 2018. So I think you know, again, the issue is very much that to me anyway, the prime issue is that the corporation either didn't really know the seriousness of what they were looking at, and you know, they are engineers. They're very focused on making sure that the infrastructure they have is safe and usable. So they would be very focused on maintaining the existing bridge, and then they would turn their focus to a new bridge once they get approval for that. But they would be very much focused on trying to keep the existing bridge operating and serviceable, and that was taking a lot more time and effort. And even once they started to bring forward the seriousness of the issue, they were still talking about needing a new bridge in 2021. The decision to put a new bridge in place was made in 2011, which would have given 10 years to replace that bridge. But then it was later on discovered that no, you can't wait until 2021. You need a new bridge in 2018. So what all of those, how all of that went down between, the ministers of the day, the deputy minister, JCCBI, that's very difficult for us to know again, because we can't get in behind those conversations. It is clear to me, though, that JCCBI during this time period should have been stressing the importance of the need to replace the bridge, the importance of the degradation of the bridge, and the fact that that needed to be replaced more strongly than they did.
Thank you. I think we can leave it at that. This Tuesday, of course, we are calling the Clerk of the Privy Council because of a concern that our committee has. And when we see audits and when we see that information isn't being passed to deputy ministers or to ministers, this is problematic. And I think all parties recognize that. And so we'll leave it at that. But it's a very serious message that our Auditor General gave us in his last report, and one that we want to focus in on many times when we have different departments here. But we do want to thank you for being here and for coming and answering to the Auditor General's report and to his recommendations. We will be drafting a study of this meeting and of information both from the Auditor General's report and your testimony. And we would encourage you on a couple of ways that if you leave here and you've already committed to getting us some answers to some of the questions, I think, of Ms. Sanssouci's and others. But if you leave here and you think, perhaps I could have expanded on this answer, or I could have given clearer answer on that question, please just submit that to our clerk, and we'll make sure that that's put in if it's relevant to our study. And we do thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here, and we will be following up with the action plan. We typically do not say that, okay, we've had the department here, or we've had the group here, and so now we won't see you till there's another audit. If some of the action plan measures aren't being met in a timely way, you may well have an invitation back to our committee, which isn't all bad, but it may not be as good next time. So in a way, thank you very much for being here, and we will be suspended for one moment. I have one small item on the committee business, just so that we can make sure our clerk gets payment for a book that we purchased for a visiting delegation. So we will suspend momentarily and allow them to make their way out. Thank you. We were delighted to have the the Speaker of Guyana and delegation join us here last week. In that time, we instructed our clerk to pick up a little book or a little memento for their speaker from Canada from our committee, and the cost was around $23. And she did it, and we presented it to him. But we need a motion in order for her to be paid back. So Ms. Alexander moves, seconded by Mr. Deltel. Are we all in favor then? That carries. Thank you all. Have a very good weekend. Trust we'll see you next week, and thank you for being here, both to our guests. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.